Thanks so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. Good to see everybody. I only have a limited amount of information to share with you, so I hope to get you out of here by midnight tonight. What I would ask, just to kind of facilitate that a little bit, is you have sheets of paper for note-taking on the tables. If you think of a question as we go along, if you could just jot that question down, and then at the end, we'll be sure to leave some time to cover all your various questions and try to come up with some answers for them. So, tonight, with apologies to Pete Seeger and Peter, Paul, and Mary, we're asking the question, where have all the Catholics gone? Long time passing, where have all the Catholics gone? They're not here no more. Where have all the Catholics gone? Sleeping in is their concern. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they return? Everybody out. Where have all the Catholics gone? Long time passing. Where have all the Catholics gone? They're not here no more. Where have all the Catholics gone? Shopping seems to be more fun. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they return? One more. Where have all the Catholics gone? Long time passing. Where have all the Catholics gone? They're not here no more. Where have all the Catholics gone? My kids in dance class every day. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they return? Good question. Lots of questions.
Among the many interesting things that came up in the conversation and in the release of your plans this past week, this revelation, I suppose, that only 15% of the people who identify themselves as Catholic are actually making Mass part of their week.
Yes.
Is that deeply troubling?
Oh, and that's the worst part of, it's the greatest challenge in all of this. And so this reorganization is only a beginning, and it sets up a platform from which we can begin to regrow the church, get people to come back, and also get people who are unchurched to come and share what we feel is this great blessing of our communion with the Lord Jesus.
Where we do see growth in church life in America, it sems to be, is in these mega churches, like the Joel Osteens, who are weekly transmitting to thousands and thousands. Part of the new mission that you're giving the faithful is this idea that they do need to be more evangelical, which does not quite feel like the Catholic fabric.
Exactly. This is not something we've had to do for a very long time. It has been the experience of almost all of us that it's our community, whether it's our neighborhood, our extended family, that's how we spread the faith, that's how we're sustained. That's not working for us anymore for a lot of reasons, a lot of them having to do with the social circumstances in which we live. And so we have to be a lot more intentional in inviting and encouraging other people to join us and to continue to share faith with us.
So that was from a television interview back in 2011, right after the Together in Faith process, when the Archbishop basically revealed that over the next several years, several parishes, almost 100 parishes, are going to be closed in the Archdiocese. And of course that created a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and it really does beg the question then, how did we get here? Where did this all stem from? And what I'd like to share with you tonight, because we all have opinions, we all have thoughts as to how we got here, how this all happened. But I'd like to share with you some of the things that I've read about over the last several years, some of the studies that I've done, some of the work that I've read, to come up with an idea of not only how we got here, but more importantly, how we're going to move forward. Because that's really what's most important. How are we going to move forward beyond this to create a new and better church than what we have today? I think we have to go back to talk about society. We have to, because the church, as we'll talk about, the church is in society. The church is in the world. And so in order to understand how the church got to be the way it is right now, we have to remember some of the things, some of the touchstones that have happened over the last 50, 60, 70 years within our society, within our culture. And I think it really goes back to a time when what we now call our greatest generation was really formed, starting with the Depression. People learned to do without. People endured great suffering. People endured great deprivation. And you hear stories, you read books, you understand that people were able to find ways to make do with incredibly little amounts. My very first job, I worked with a woman who lived during the Great Depression. It made a great impression on me because I would go to do something and she'd say, no, take this, this, and this, put them together, tie it right around this way, and it will work just fine. And she was right. It worked. And I really learned that kind of an ethic of not being wasteful from Mrs. Bennett because of what she went through back in the 1930s and early 40s with the lifestyle that she had. Now, if you know your history, we also know that the next thing that happened was World War II. That these young men and women, men especially, after having all this deprivation at home, had to put on a pair of boots and go overseas. And they, as all people who have been to war, whether it was World War II, Vietnam, doesn't matter what war, you see things you shouldn't see. Human beings should not have to endure what you see in wartime. And it made an indelible mark on these people. After enduring the Great Depression, they're hoping for a better life. They're hoping for more, and instead they had to do with less again. There's a movie out right now called The Monuments Men, and I'm reading the book. And as World War II was winding down, and the United States armies was moving through southern Germany, the 7th Army was heading towards Austria, and the 3rd Army was coming down across. And everybody knew that the war was coming to an end. And instead of things getting better in Germany, to a lot of these soldiers, things were getting worse. And one of the soldiers, one of the Monuments Men, wrote home to his wife. How can I describe the strange combination of experiences each day here this beautiful place brings? And in the midst of it all, thousands of homeless foreigners wandering about in pathetic droves. Germans in uniforms, mostly with arms or legs or both missing. Children who are friendly, older ones who hate you. Crimes continually in the foreground of life. Plenty, misery, recriminations, sympathy. All such an exaggerated picture of the man-made way of life in a God-made world. If it all doesn't prove the necessity of heaven, I don't know what it means. I believe that all this loveliness showing through the rubble and wreck are just foreshadowings of the joys we were made for. When the soldiers came home, after enduring this hardship, after growing up in the Depression, after surviving the war, they knew why God exists. They knew where God was in their lives. And they brought that home with them. They made sure that God was the center of their families. They made sure that we were raised in a home where God was important and God was talked about. And that formed who we are. Who we are. But then the very interesting thing started happening. The United States did begin to prosper. And we began moving out. We didn't live down on the east side or the west side of Detroit anymore. We didn't live in our little Catholic ghettos. Okay? Suburbanites started popping up. We started moving out to those far suburbs called Redford and Warren and St. Clair Shores and Roseville. Way out there. I remember when I was growing up, my mom and dad bought a house at 11 Mile and Rhine. And for a treat, they would take us to an ice cream store. We'd go, it would be a ride. We'd have to get in the car, get settled in, because we were going way out in the country to go for ice cream. To 15 Mile and Mountain Road. Where that party store is, there used to be an ice cream parlor. Anybody remember that? Sure. Okay. But that was way out in the country. Okay? You folks who live out in Macomb Township, okay? That was farmland. Nobody lived out there. And now look, that's just part of where we are. But this expansion from living in the cities where we were close together, where everybody on the street was Catholic. We all went to Catholic school together. We all went to the same church together. Doesn't happen anymore. We moved out. We looked for new places to live. And something changed. Something started to happen. Something started to unravel a little bit. But at the same time, there was something bigger going on in society. Something that would change us dramatically. Camelot came to an end. JFK, Bobby, Martin Luther King, assassinated. The civil rights movement, the protests, the riots, the fights. We had the Vietnam War being televised in all our living rooms. People started saying, wait a minute, something's not right here. But it was wrong to criticize. It was like, wait a minute, I'm not sure I should be doing this. Those blasted hippies out in the streets, anybody here? Complaining about the Vietnam War, protesting the Vietnam War. Okay? They were crazy. They were the fringe groups. That wasn't bad enough. Then you women started rising up and you wanted equal rights too. All of a sudden, society began to question things. It was no longer okay to just go along. And then the real watershed moment, according to several historians, happened with Watergate. Watergate hit. We all just took a step back. Wait a minute. What do you mean I can't trust my government? All of a sudden, the journalists were no longer compliant with the government. Read stories about how Walter Cronkite and Brinkley and Huntley and that era of reporters back with Kennedy and Eisenhower, they would get called into the White House and they would say, would you please tell the public this, this, and this, and kind of frame it that way so that we look okay? And they said, okay, fine, we'll do that. Watergate hit, forget that, no more. Now we're going to investigate. Now we're going to look into things. And the American public said, wait a minute, I have questions. And we all agreed, it's good to question. It's good to try to find out what's really going on behind the scenes. That was new. That's new. That was never like that before. You fast forward now, you add in prosperity. You add in fast technological growth. And we have moved on to a time and a place where it's all about me. We always blame the young people. Those young kids, they have no sense of community. They have no sense of group belonging. But guess what, folks? We're all the same. It's not just the young people. Certainly, the millennial generation is probably the most evident of it. But we're all in the same boat. We're all the same way. I want it now. Remember the movie Finding Nemo? Little about the fish? Remember the seagulls? Mine, 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 mine. That's how we are. I want it. Veruca. I want it now. And this is the society we have now. There's a commercial out right now for one of the new Cadillac electric vehicle. Watch it really close next time you see it. It's really kind of scary. The guy's talking about how those Europeans, they take a month off. They take the whole month off in August. Me, I take 2 weeks. Why? And he's living in this beautiful house with beautiful kids with lots of stuff. And he says, because I want my stuff. And in the end, he gets out and he unplugs his Cadillac and he gets in and he drives off. Because he wants his stuff. He's not a teenager. That's what our society has become. I don't know how. I don't know why. But the bottom line is that's who we are. It's all about how much I have. Do I have more than you? Do you have more than them? Whoever has the most toys wins. This is what we are. You see in the advertisements, you see in the political process. It's all about me. And that I think has as much to do with what is going on, not only in society, certainly, but in the church, as anything else. Now, what has been going on in the church? Well, 50 years ago, things were pretty quiet. Pretty quiet. John Cardinal Dearden, former Archbishop of Detroit, as most of you know, great quote. The church never had such a tranquil, ordered period in the whole history as in the first part of this century. In a sense, we knew where everything was. It was a well-ordered institution, he said. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Sure. You knew where everything was. You knew what the pecking order was. The Pope, the bishop, the priest, they ran the show. What was the phrase? Pray, pay, and obey. Very simple. Learn the Baltimore Catechism, you got all the answers. Did you have to understand what the Baltimore Catechism meant? You just memorized it. Be able to spit it back. When I ask a question, you give me the answer. That's all you needed. Check the box. Check the box. So it appeared to everybody, that the 40s, 50s, and early part of the 1960s, maybe even back to 1930s, very structured, very ordered, very peaceful time in the Catholic Church. The funny thing is, or the ironic thing is that behind the scenes, unbeknownst to just about everybody, there was change happening. All of a sudden, there was a renewed interest in Scripture study. And Pope Pius XII said, go for it. Not many people knew about it yet, but that there were theologians working on it behind the scenes. There was a renewed interest in, okay, what is the role of the laity? Pope Pius XII said, look into it. And there were priests and theologians looking into it. there was a growing recognition that the schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church really wasn't very good. This was not good for the church. And Pope Pius XII said, start talking to these guys. Start finding out what's going on there. But most of us had no clue this was happening. Until that moment in 1962, when Pope John the 23rd, blessed Pope John the 23rd, soon to be saint, was walking in the garden one night, one afternoon. He turned to his secretary and said, I got an idea. Let's get the boys together. We're going to talk. Depending on what books you read and what you listen to, a lot of people will portray that as this, blinding moment of Holy Spiritness. And certainly it was a Holy Spirit moment. But if you learn anything at all about good Pope John, you find out this was coming. This was in the works. Of course, the guys that made him Pope didn't know this. They underestimated him a little bit. But Pope John was a diplomat. First of all, he served as a soldier, as a clinical worker in the hospitals in World War I. But he was a diplomat in the church. He represented the church in Paris for a number of years. He worked in, I was going to look it up before tonight, either Bulgaria or Hungary, I can't remember which, for a long time. In fact, he was really disappointed because he thought he would end up dying there. He didn't want to die there. So he was a diplomat. He was somebody who knew what was going on in the church. He had the Pope's ear. He knew what Pius XII was thinking and talking about and concerned about. But good Pope John was raised in a small town in northern Italy. And he never lost his roots. He never lost his connection with the people. So even though he was a cardinal, and even though he had these vaulted offices, he stayed in touch with his family, he stayed in touch with his friends, he stayed in touch with his priests, his brother priests. So he had his ear to the ground. He knew what people were thinking. He knew what the concerns were. He saw what was going on in Europe after the end of the war. He could see what was happening. So when he called the Second Vatican Council together, this was not something that was just out of the blue. That he had, I don't know what's going to happen here, guys, but let's get together and have a party. No. This was deliberate, this was well thought out, and he knew where it needed to go. He saw the changes coming. Holy Spirit gave him the vision to be able to see that something needed to be done. You've probably heard this before, but it's very, very important to remember. The Second Vatican Council was the first ecumenical council held by the church that was not to fix a problem. There were no heresies to worry about. There were no faith issues. We weren't going to set new doctrines. All that was set. They weren't going to change any church teachings. They were called together to talk about how do we communicate the truths of the church to a changing modern world. How do we get the laity more involved, to do more things within the church? Good Pope John saw the changes coming. He says, we've got to do something to keep the church relevant. And Cardinal Dearden said it probably one of the very best ways. If we had not experienced the Second Vatican Council, we would have to think of the church as something like a museum, unaffected by things that go all around it. Overseen by old men in fancy robes. The reality is the church is a very living part of the world because we are in it. One of the very, very important documents that came out of the Second Vatican Council was the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world. One of the participants, a Bishop Braxton, is now retired, wrote of it, "The document's title is very important. Notice it is the church in the modern world, not the church and the modern world. This distinction is most significant. If we speak simply of the church and the world, it could imply that the church exists unchangeably, and its goal is to change the world, but the world has no impact on the church. Some Christians in the past, and some in the present, have thought that the world around them was evil, and thus the enemy of Jesus Christ. The Council Fathers want to declare that the church is in the modern world, and it is affected by that world." That's huge. That's huge. There are those who don't want the church to change at all. I want the church the way it was, and I don't want it to change. The Council Fathers said, that's not real. That's not reality, folks. We have to change. We have to change because the world's changing. We want Jesus to be real in today's world. We want Jesus to be recognizable by the people who live in today's world. And what better place to find Jesus than in the church? That was, depending on who you talk to me, that's one of the most important things that came out of Vatican II. You liturgists in the back of the room, you may have other opinions, but Second Vatican Council covered so much, so many wonderful things. But if it weren't for this document, we would have shells of churches, not just declining churches. The 1960s, and this is really important to see. The 1950s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s was truly a time like no other. Look at some of these numbers here. In 1900, 12,000 priests in the entire United States. 50,000 nuns. 14 million Catholics. And mass participation, here's an interesting thought, less than 30%. 65 years later, we have got almost 59,000 priests, 180,000 nuns running around, 45.5 million Catholics. Mass participation, woohoo! We're over 45%, over almost half. Does that never surprise you? Only 45%? You probably thought it was a lot higher than that even, didn't you? Sure. But the reality is, that's as high as it ever got. That is from, everybody keeps statistics on something, right? You got baseball, hockey, football, okay. Everybody's keeping stats. They even keep stats on churches. Back in the Civil War, American Civil War, 1860s, church participation was probably about 20-25%. You've heard stories, you've seen in the movies, you've read books, you've heard stories about the revivals. People going across the country with their wagons, having great revivals. Why? Because only 30% of people were going to church. We get into 1960 with all these priests and all these Catholics, and we've still only got half of them going to church. If you're honest with yourself, go back and think about what it was like growing up. Think about your friends' families. Think about it. They'll go, oh yeah, you know what? Her dad never did go to church, did he? I never saw him in church. I did. That's what I was doing. I was going, you know what? That kind of makes sense now. I went back, yeah, I guess so. I guess they really did go to church. But see, we grew up in Catholic families. We grew up in Catholic neighborhoods. We just recognize, well, of course you go to church, that's what you do. And surely everybody does the same thing. And to the highest degree in recorded history, they did. But even then, it was only about half, not even. 50 years later, we've got a little less than 37,000 priests in the United States, 51,000 sisters, 66.8 million Catholics. And mass participation, right back where we started, some 30. But can you see that this moment in time was unique? This was not the norm. This was a special time. This was a graced moment in our history. And really what we're seeing right now, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about, we're almost back to a normal situation. Which is disturbing, which is unfortunate. But that's the way it is. What's really important to notice, and we're going to talk about this again, is 66.8 million Catholics. We started off at the beginning of the 20th century with 14. So a lot more of us. Okay? 1.2 billion Catholics in the world today. That's a lot of Catholics. In some ways, it's probably good they don't all go to church. We've got no room for them. Okay? Here's where some of the problems start to come in, start to show up. And again, we've come full circle. We've gone back to the beginning, or back to the future. 1950, nationwide, we basically had one priest per parish. You're thinking, oh, no, Tim. No, sorry. Our parish had 5 priests. Yeah, maybe yours did. Guess what? Go down to Mississippi. Go down to Louisiana. Well, Louisiana's probably a bad example. Go to Texas, Arizona, South Carolina. Okay? They didn't have 5 priests. But as time went through, as we went through the 1960s, we got up to a nationwide average of almost 2 priests per parishes. And over time, we've gone back down to basically 1 priest, a little less per parish. Right now, in 1965, there were 777 Catholics per priest. In 2012, almost 1,700 Catholics per priest in the United States. And here in Detroit, in 2012, 3,070 Catholics being served by 1 priest, per priest, on average. And I will tell you that's about right. Here at St. Blase, we have 4,000 Catholics being served by 1 priest. And you might say, well, yeah, but only 30% of them come to Mass. Fine. Guess what? They all want their kids baptized. They all want their kids to receive the sacraments. They all want to be anointed when the time comes. They all want to have a funeral when the time comes. When there's a problem, a divorce, they need counseling, they want to see Father. So 3,000 Catholics or 4,000 Catholics per priest. It's an incredible burden on our priesthood. It's really one of the big issues with the declining number of priests. So when the Archbishop announces that we're going to close 100 parishes, these are some of the reasons why. We don't have the priests to service the number of parishes we have right now. We don't have the number of Catholics attending the churches that we did. We have to make some adjustments. The Together in Faith process one of the goals that the Archbishop told everybody who participated in that was, no Catholic should be more than 20 minutes away from the Eucharist. We thought, okay, well, that seems like a pretty reasonable objective. My dad lives in Greenville, South Carolina. And it takes him, on a good day, 20 minutes, usually closer to 25, to get from his house to his church. And basically, he can either go that way, or he can go that way. Either way, it's going to take him 20 to 25 minutes. And it's just the way it is. Take a guess. From this neighborhood right behind St. Blase here, how many churches could you get to in 20 minutes? 11. 11. There's a lot of Catholics in the Midwest. Okay? We've built up. There was a time when all those parishes were needed. There was a time when all those parishes were justified. Going forward, remains to be seen which ones are going to be able to stand individually and which ones are going to have to come together to form new communities. But the realities have changed. So, where are we today? What's going on today? In 2007, the Pew Research Center released what is really a landmark survey, landmark study that covered an immense amount of information about attitudes and practices in religions. Not just Catholicism, all religions. And I will encourage you to Google it on the internet. Go to the Pew Research Center. Takes a little bit of work to get to it. But it's all out there. And again, just a mountain of information, a mountain of data. And I'm just going to share with you a few highlights. This is the section where it's going to be called Information Overload. Okay? So hang with me. We'll get through it together. Here's a big chart. Oh yeah, okay. So what are we looking at here? This is frequency of attendance at masses or at religious services by tradition. Okay, so here we are with Catholic, and we look across, and more than once a week, about 9% of folks come to church. 33% say they come about once a week, and on and on and on. Okay? What's interesting to me is that as you look at this up and down, just look at the once a week chart, and other than our brothers and sisters, the Mormons, we're actually the group that attends church most on a weekly basis. Protestants actually will come out more than once a week. They do their Wednesday, Sunday thing. Okay, but on a once a week basis, us Catholics are actually in the building more than almost any other group. Not so bad. Not so bad. But it goes up and down. But it just confirms what everybody is saying, that it's about 30 to 32% of registered members of a church are coming to Mass on a weekly basis. Evangelicals, less than a third, are coming to church on a weekly basis. About a third go out twice a week. Mainline Protestant churches, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists, even less. Black Protestants, about a third. Muslims, about a quarter. Jewish, 10%. On average, the total population of the United States, about 25% of people on a Sunday morning are going to be found in their house of worship. We feel that. We know that. That's not a surprise to anybody in this room. We see the malls. We see the movie theaters. We see Ford Field. Okay? So we know this. But as religions go, us Catholics aren't doing so bad. We'd like those numbers to be higher. But overall, Catholics are being reasonably faithful. But why did they leave? That's why you're here tonight. This is why you paid the big bucks for these seats. I don't really want to know what you paid for that seat. So why did people leave Catholicism? If you go to the Pew Study, you can find this chart for practically any denomination. This is the one for Catholics. "71% of people who no longer go to church just drifted away." They're not angry, not upset. They just stopped going. In fact, when you look at the numbers, for every 10 people who no longer attend Catholic Church, 5 of them just stop going. They're not going anywhere else. They're not going to the mega church. They're not going to any other. They just stop going to church. Half. The mega churches get all kinds of blame for taking away all the Catholics. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Christians in general, Catholics in particular, just got lazy. The scary thing is that, forgive me, I can't remember which bishop said it, but one of the bishops said it takes 2 generations. It takes 1 generation to go from attendance to non-attendance. It takes another generation to go from non-attendance to no faith. We'll talk about that in a second as well. So what are some of the reasons that they did go away? Well, for those who are now attending a Protestant church, the biggest problem is that they felt their spiritual needs were not being met. They would come to church on Sunday and got nothing out of it. Again, the unaffiliated people, that really wasn't a big concern for them because they didn't care anyway. Okay? But for those who are attending a Protestant church, that's the number one reason, is that they felt that the services they were going to in the Catholic Church were just worthless. Not interesting. No challenge. Some of the other reasons, some of the things that we Catholics think must have been important, well, were they unhappy about abortion or homosexuality? Well, maybe about half or so of the unaffiliated ones, but the ones who go to the Protestant churches, no. 20% maybe, 15%, depending on the issue. That's really not the issue. How about teaching on birth control? Again, about half if you're unaffiliated, but if you're a Protestant, no, 15% or so. It's really not a big deal. Well, it's got to be the way they treat those women in the Catholic Church. Really? No, not so much. Especially the ones that go to the evangelical churches. Doesn't even come on the blue. So what are some of the other reasons? Well, it's got to be the clergy sexual abuse scandal. That's what drove everybody away. 27% of the unaffiliated, about 20% of those Protestant. That's not the issue. Now, what I will say about that is, of all the issues on this chart, this one probably took away that 20% that fast. When that abuse scandal hit, that 20% stood up and said, "I'm out of here." And we felt it. That sucking sound you heard was all those folks leaving. Whereas all these other reasons, they just dribbled away over time. So this one was a big deal. This one we felt. And we continue to feel it. It's in the news all the time. It's an issue that won't go away. It really goes back to, who do we trust? It's all part of that cultural thing. Can we trust our government? Can we trust our teachers? Can we trust our priests? Can we trust our clergy? And anytime there's an issue that proves that we can't trust them, boy, it's the headline on the news, doesn't it? It just reinforces us over and over and over again, but it's really not the big issue. Priests should marry, right? Well, gee, maybe 20% who turned Protestant felt that was important. These are all the issues that are important to us. Because we're in the church and we're seeing empty chairs, it's important to us. We're trying to find what is the reason that they left. And we come up with all these reasons. It's got to be homosexuality. It's got to be birth control. It's got to be those pre-sexual abuses. It's got to be. What else could it be? Numbers say, no. I decided to sleep in on Sunday. There was a sale at Macy's. I decided to go there instead. No, I went to tailgate for the Lions game instead of going to church. You know, my kid has to go to softball on Sunday mornings. There's just no other time for him to do it. You know what my mother would have said about that? So when do we lose them? Another organization besides the Pew Study is a group called CARA, C-A-R-A. It's a group out of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. They've also done a number of studies which have pretty much verified what the Pew Study came up with. But one of the questions that they share, and again, their website has a whole bunch of stuff too, and I'll encourage you to go there. But when do we lose them? Well, again, not surprising. I think everybody in the room would have guessed this. Somewhere between the ages 13 and 40, teens, young adults, is where we lose them. Median age 21. But don't blame the kids. Don't blame the kids. How does a 13-year-old get to church? They're not riding their bikes by themselves, folks. Okay? So when you hear Alice and Ann and Father and Mary and other churches around talking to parents, saying, you gotta bring your kid to church. This is why. We know this is important. In fact, Cara actually asked the questions. Why do you go to church? Well, great. 77% said they have a need to receive the sacrament. Praise God. That's awesome. I enjoy taking part in the service. Thank you. So be Eucharistic ministers, be lectors, be altar servers. That's great. I love this one. The church requires that I attend. I should bring Ann up here and have her tell you stories of the arguments and the fights that she's had with parents of kids receiving their first communion when they find out that we've looked and we find out they don't come to church. And we look at them and we say, I'm sorry, your kid is not going to receive first communion here because there's no point. You don't come to church. You don't understand why it's important. You haven't taught your kid why that's important. And you can't say that. Yeah, actually we can. Because it's that important. Why have your kid get the sacrament if they're not coming to church? And so, yeah, okay, fine, great. I'll own that one. 33%, 34% people come because I have to. Okay. When I was growing up, I went to church because I had to. My kids, they went to church because they had to. Now, let's be honest. A lot of people who no longer go to church went to church when they were younger because they had to. And they're not. We do have free will. We do make our own choices once we become adults. So there's no guarantees in any of this. And we need to be honest with that as well. But why don't they come to church more often? The biggest reason? family responsibilities. What the heck is that? Well, yeah, okay. The soccer games, the baseball games, the dance classes, the hockey, whatever, yeah, all the sports, okay. You know, well, we gotta go visit grandma today. Doesn't grandma want you in church? Okay. So, family responsibilities, they've decided they're too busy. But it's a choice they've made. We can invite, we can cajole, we can even demand, but in the end, they have to make a choice. Some of them are going to wake up a little bit. Again, Ann and Alice can tell you stories of families who have said, thank you. Thank you for reminding me why this is important. We're going to get our butts back in church. Others, not so much. It's their choice. And that's frustrating to us. Because as I look through the room and I recognize just about all of your faces, how do I recognize you? I see you in church. So I know this is important to you. Okay? So when you hear things like this, that they simply have chosen not to come, I can feel your anger. I can feel your frustration. But it's not that we're doing anything wrong. It's not that the Catholic Church is doing anything wrong. They've made a choice. And yes, we have to try to respond to some of those choices, but we have to simply acknowledge that in the end, there's going to be people who are still going to walk away. Because in today's society, I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what I want to. That's the world we live in. So, very briefly, let's just talk about what's happening here at St. Blase. Some of these are going to look a little bit scary, but don't be, all right? Over the last 8 years or so, there has been a steady decline. Again, I'm not surprised to anybody here. You see what it looks like on Saturday night, Sunday morning. And actually, we could take this graph back almost 12, 13 years from before Father Randy even got here. And the numbers would look exactly the same. It's been a steady, straight line decline, about 100 members a year, we just lose. The interesting thing is, you look at new parishioner registrations, we're actually getting more every year. Unfortunately, we can't get enough new ones to compensate for the folks that we're losing. How do we lose them? Biggest reason? Funerals. Funerals. If you look at the demographics of our parish, we are an aging parish. There are simply not as many young people in our parish as there were. Macomb County, especially this part of Macomb County, is facing this. 12% fewer kids in Warren Consolidated Schools than there were 10 years ago, 10 years ago. This number right here will kind of explain it all. Sterling Heights High School, class of 1975. I am proud to say that I was in the top 10% of my graduating class. How do I know this? I was number 65 out of 650. Do the math. But hey, it was top 10%, all right? Let's be clear. 650 kids. This year's graduating class, 350. Where are all the kids? They're out in the northern part of the county. They're out in northern Oakland County. They don't live here no more. It's just changed. The demographics have changed. So part of this, there's almost nothing we can do about. We're not admitting defeat by any stretch. Be very clear about that. But a lot of this is simply demographics that we have no control. How do we compare to some of our neighboring parishes? This is kind of a fun one, all right? This is us right here. Between 2005 and 2010, St. Blase lost about 13% of our membership. Okay? St. Renee's lost 48% of their membership in the same time frame. St. Ephraim's lost 31%. St. Malachi's has lost about 5%. So, we're not the best, we're not the worst. And you compare with all the other parishes in this area, in southern Macomb County, you see the same kind of numbers. We're not doing anything in particularly bad to chase people away. It's the demographics. It's the world we live in. It's simply the way things are. Do we have to adapt to that? Yes. Do we have to do what we can to keep people as much as we possibly can? Absolutely. Do we need to be a welcoming Catholic community? Yeah, absolutely. But in the end, we're still going to see declines. It's just very difficult times that we live in. So, when I went to one of the Lions games this year, it was the Dallas Cowboy game. And we got talking to the guy sitting next to us, and he was wearing his cowboy outfit. And after I threw my pop on him. So where are you from? We're from Toronto. Toronto? You know, Ontario? He's, yeah, Toronto, Ontario. Did you drive in? He's, yeah, we drove in this morning. Why is a guy from Toronto a Dallas Cowboy fan? My dad was. I was raised to be a Dallas Cowboy fan. I thought, wow, weird, but okay. Do you know what? Most of us, I think, in this room were raised to be Catholics. You're Catholic because your parents were Catholic. It used to be that way. There used to be no question. If my parent was a Catholic, I'm going to be a Catholic. Today, that's not the case anymore. That's not being passed on through the generations. It's frustrating. And it's sad. Let's just name it. It's sad. But it's the reality. It's not being passed on. We're giving choices. We have choices to make. You and I feel that faith and participating in a faith community is important. That is something that should be passed on. Again, the reality is in our society, people say, don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me what to believe. I will believe what I want to believe. And too many people are simply choosing not to believe. This is another chart that shows the percentage of people in America participate in a particular denomination. 2007, approximately 23% of Americans were Catholic. 2012, 22%. Drop of about 1%. Okay, we've stayed pretty low. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the main reason for that is immigration of Hispanic people, bringing their Catholicism to the United States. And that's a whole other issue. But when you look at how, again, we compare to our Protestant brothers and sisters, Protestants in general have lost a good 5%. Evangelicals have actually dropped 2%. What about those churches. They're sucking everybody into them. They're huge. What you find out when you start looking at their documents is that there's a dynamic going on in the evangelical community where the big are getting bigger and the small are getting smaller. The large megachurches are sucking away all the evangelicals from the smaller communities. There's a Assembly of God community down in the Saline area near Ann Arbor. They have 20 people. 20 is their entire congregation. We hear about the Kensingtons, we hear about the Bethesdas, we hear about the Grace Bibles. We hear, oh man, they're just packed every week. Yeah, they are. But they're drawing most of their numbers not from Catholic land. They're getting it from other evangelicals. The interesting thing is, again, this is not, I'm not making these numbers up. These are from their own documents, from their own congregation. 67% the people who go into that church are there for the first time. They belong someplace else, but they heard something good about this church, so let me check it out. Think they're going to stay? Probably not. Not all of them. It's a great deal of turnover, great deal of churning going on, even in the megachurches. So while, yeah, you look at their parking lot on a Sunday morning, yeah, it's packed. And you hear about it. Oh, they have newspaper articles. Woo, they're going crazy. They are, but at the expense of other evangelical churches. Yes, some Catholics go there. Absolutely. Is it the biggest draw? Not by a long shot. Maybe 15 to 20% of people who leave the Catholic Church are going to the evangelical churches. But most don't. Most people who turn Protestant and leave Catholicism and become Protestant, you know why? Because they got married into the church. Their spouse was Lutheran. So they're going to Lutheran church. They're not being drawn unless they're really unhappy with the services. Where are the Catholics in the world? 41% are from Latin America. Where's our Pope from? Coincidence? I think not. But here's something I do want to point out. North America makes up 7% of worldwide Catholics. We can be very, very vocal about things that we want to see the Catholic Church do. We're 7% of the worldwide Catholic Church, folks. Be careful. Let's not be arrogant Americans. But the thing that has changed from the 1900s and the 1960s, the things that should concern us all, is what are now being referred to as the nuns. And I don't mean the religious ladies. Okay? The unaffiliated. Maybe Catholicism has only gone down 1. Maybe the evangelicals have gone down a couple of percent. But the unaffiliated are skyrocketing. These are the people who, when asked, what denomination are you? When somebody from the survey calls, they simply say, nothing. Nada. These are the unaffiliated. They were raised something. Catholic, Protestant, something. But today, they're nothing. And the number is growing at such an exponential rate that it's something that we do need to be concerned about. In 1990, not all that long ago, this number would have been 6%. 2008, 15%. And now in 2012, almost 20% of Americans, when asked, What denomination are you? None. Now, that's scary. Do I want my kids in the Catholic Church? Absolutely. But more importantly, I want my kids to have a relationship with Jesus. That's first and foremost. So for someone to say, when 20% of people say, not important, I don't care about going to church, that's terrifying. That's very worrisome. Actually, I feel bad because on the first chart that showed mass attendance, one of the categories was the unaffiliated, and it shows that 2% of the unaffiliated go to church every week. I don't know where they're going, but even though they're unaffiliated, somehow or other they find themselves in a church building. So there's hope. There is a possibility. But this is the state of where we're at. This is what is going on. I would refer you to this book, Bad Religion. And at the end here, I'm going to pass out a reading list to you, and it's on it. Ron Duque is the author. It talks about the 4 heresies of modern Christianity that is leading to this kind of attitude of self-centeredness, of just getting it wrong. And it's something that can be addressed. But the biggest reason is we are now a secular, individualistic consumer society. If any of you have taken Mary's Old Testament class, she has a chapter on the book of Kings. And I'll never forget listening to it for the first time as she was reading some examples. It's from the chapter 17 of the second book of Kings. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, began his 9-year reign over Israel and Samaria. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, yet not to the extent of the kings of Israel before him. This came about because the Israelites sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the dominion of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, because they venerated other gods. They adopted unlawful practices toward the Lord their God. They built high places in all their settlements, the watchtowers as well as the walled cities. They set up pillars and sacred poles for themselves on every high hill and under every leafy tree. There on all the high places, they burned incense like the nations whom the Lord had sent into exile at their coming. They did evil things that provoked the Lord and served idols, although the Lord had told them, "You must not do this." It was thousands of years ago. Right back where we started. We have new idols. Yeah. Carry one around. Okay. Technology, money, cars, big houses. Did I mention money? Nice clothes, fancy shoes. Did I mention money? But we have new names for our idols. We call them Nintendo. The Old Testament was Baal. Today it's Wii. The commercials you see on television suck us in. They tell us, forget about what you know is right. Do what you want. Pope Francis is trying to help us identify this, to get away from this idolatry of money. But boy, it's an uphill fight. Boy, it's a hard thing. Because it's so easy to get caught up in. For 23 years, I ran my own business. And ups and downs, like any business does. But I found myself, when things would go really, really well, man, I was proud of myself. Boy, Tim, you're doing a bang-up job. Things are really clicking. You're working hard, you're making everything happen. Good for you, boy. Guess what? Down it went. Oops, I forgot. It's not about me. My business, my life, my family are gifts from God. I'd get back down on my knees and I'd say, okay, God, this is yours. Do with it what you will. Right back up again. I admit, I went through the cycle several times, okay? I get really good, and I would forget where it all had come from. It wasn't about me. I had great employees who worked very, very hard. And as long as I kept in mind where this money was coming from, where this hard work was coming from, my business did okay. But as soon as I got proud, as soon as I got a little bit greedy, boy, all of a sudden I started making bad choices. I started making bad decisions. The business would decline again. And our world is caught up in this. Our world is caught up in the chase for more. I want more. Problem is, in our society, there are people who don't know what to do with less, who don't know what to do with more. There's sadness, there's brokenness. There are people looking for answers, and they don't even know where to turn because they think they have forgotten that the answers are here in this room with the people of God. Funny thing is, they're looking for answers. And they say, but I don't know who has the answer. I don't know where to turn. I don't know what to call what I'm looking for. There was an interview by Tom Brady, quarterback for the New England Patriots. He's making, I don't know, $15, $18 million a year. The reporter says, wow, good for you. What's that feel like? He says, something's missing. You're making $18 million a year and something's missing? Go buy it. He's lost. He's got a model for a wife. He's got good-looking kids. He drives the best cars in the world. The man's lost. It's fabulous, fascinating interview. He doesn't know what to name what he's looking for. And guess what? Isn't that the name of God? The unnameable, the unknowable. The answer is right there in front of us all, and people can't see it. And our challenge is, how do we invite people back in? How do we make this? I believe, I really do, that deep down inside, even the people who say they're not affiliated, people who are lost, call it what you will, but there's something inside of all of us that seeks God. I've seen it a few times in my life. One of them was when 9/11 hit. For just a couple of days, didn't last very long, but for a couple of days when 9/11 hit, our church and churches all over were full of people. They remembered that, hey, we need help. This is scary. I need to get back to my center. Didn't last. The difference, partly, I remember my wife and I having this conversation. What's the difference between this war and like World War II? So World War II, everybody had to sacrifice. Reading this book, it was fascinating. Dresses for the women got shorter so that they would use less material, so they have more material to give to the soldiers. Women didn't wear stockings. They just painted lines up the back of their legs to pretend like they had stockings. They did with less. When your bicycle broke down, you walked because you weren't going to buy another bicycle. There were none to be had. Your car got a flat tire in World War II. Park the car, because guess what? The ones that you can buy are even worse than the ones you got in your car already. There was sacrifice involved. We don't sacrifice today. And so our children and our young adults don't know what it means to do without. I had a friend. In a 3-year span, he almost died from surgery. About 9 months later, his wife passed away from leukemia. 3 days shy of her first anniversary, his 30-year-old son passed away. I mean, the guy just kept getting beat with a baseball bat. He attended an evangelical church. Now we'll visit him. And eventually, the conversation always came back to, I'm so confused. He says, my pastor keeps telling me, Jesus loves you. You've been saved. Everything is good. And he looked at me and he said, but I'm so broken. I hurt so bad. Why don't I feel good? He says, the Bible tells me that my wife and my son are in heaven. I should be happy about that. But I don't. And this conversation went on with him for years. He just couldn't get over it. He couldn't get over the hump. Try as I did, I could never get him to see that there was someplace else that he could go that would accept him for where he was at that moment and love him for who he was at that moment and not try to make him happy when he was feeling so broken. Unfortunately, 9 months after that, he passed away. I think of him all the time because we know that there's a tradition, that there's a home that offers something for everybody, no matter what their condition, no matter what their place. It's called the Catholic Church. And that's something that needs to be shared. So, what can we do about this? Well, given all the statistics I've shared with you, given the reality of what we see on the weekends, keep doing the same old thing is simply not an option. All right, so is that the old saw, definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing all over again and expect different results? Let's not be insane. We need to have new thinking. We have to do something different to reach out to the folks who are looking for the answers. Now I'm going to propose the 3 P's. Okay? First one, prayer. Absolutely. I'm going to start by praying for myself, so that I have the wisdom, so that I can represent our faith tradition the best way that I possibly can. Most important. I'm going to pray for the Catholic Church as a whole, for its leadership, and for all its members, so that we have the courage to be open to answer those really tough questions. And I'm going to pray for the unchurched, that they have the grace to listen to God's quiet call for more meaning in their lives. If we're praying, that means that we can talk to God. If we're talking to God, then that means we can listen to God. And if we listen to God, we can hear God's will for us. And if we hear God's will for us, we can choose to follow God's will. And if we are truly following God's will in our lives, then we're right with God. And if we're right with God, people notice that. People say, there's something different about her. There's something different about him. And they want to know more. But it has to start here. It has to start with prayer. It has to start with my relationship with Jesus. I believe it happens every day, but it gets reinforced on Sunday mornings in the Eucharist. But it has to start with me. I can't wait for somebody else to tell me what to do. Those days are gone. It starts with me, and it starts in prayer. Second P is practice. You hear a lot about the new evangelization. Boy, that's the hot buzzword, right, Dan? What the heck is a new evangelization? Well, first you got to remember what the old evangelization was. We all know what that is. We hear from the missionaries who come here every summer. They talk about taking the gospel out to the world, out to the jungles. You see movies about it. People going out, taking the word of God to people who have never heard of Jesus before. And working with them and living with them and bringing them to an understanding of the good news of Jesus Christ. That's the old evangelization. New evangelization is what's going on right here in our society. Everybody out there has heard of Jesus Christ. There's nothing new about that to them. They know about the Bible. Some of them might have even read part of it. But they have chosen to set it aside. They have chosen to walk away. So the new evangelization is about using every means available to reach out to folks, to remind them of why a faith community is so important. That's the new evangelization. You know, why does St. Blase have a Facebook page? Why do we send out a monthly email? Why do we do robocalls when there's a special event? Why do we have signs? Why do we do all these kinds of things? Because we have to. We have to reach people in any which way we possibly can. Yeah, we still use a paper bulletin. That's not going anywhere. Because guess what? People still read it. But the new evangelization says we've got to try everything in our toolbox. Find new ways to reach out to people. And the crazy thing about the new evangelization, it means that Catholics have to be evangelizers. No, not that. I always say I have got the toughest job here at the parish. I work with the evangelization committee and the stewardship committee. 2 words nobody wants to be any part of, okay? Right? Right, Peggy? Yeah, absolutely. All right. But we were raised, you know, the phrase that's attributed to St. Francis, turns out he didn't actually say this, but everybody says he did. Proclaim the gospel constantly, and when necessary, use words. Yeah. You know what? We were all raised with that attitude. Just be a good example. Well, how do I share my faith? Oh, just live a good life. People will notice. Yeah, it's not working too well, is it? When necessary, use words. I submit it's necessary. It's time to start talking about it. Because if you don't, as good of a life as you think you're leading, people still may not notice. One of the most humbling moments in my life was at a trade conference that I would go to every year up in Lansing. And this was pretty early on in my career. And I was working hard to get known and get identified and this kind of thing. And there's a lot of people in the lawn care business over in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids, as we know, is, you know, Calvinist and Reformed church, you know, haven. Good people. Standing there talking one day in the hallway like you do at a trade show. And I don't even know what the context of the conversation was or how it came up. But something came up and I said, oh yeah, you know, I'm a Catholic. These guys stopped and they looked at me. They said, you were a Christian. Well, I got through the day. That night when I went back to my hotel room, I was bummed. Here I'm a lifelong Catholic. I thought I was doing a good job. I'm active in my church. But they didn't know. All this work that I thought I was doing. Nobody cared. Nobody knew. Didn't make a bit of difference. And I vowed right then that from that moment on, people would know I was a Christian. Because I was going to tell them. I was going to show them. I was going to tell them. And so when I would give talks, or when I would give seminars, or when I would have conversations, one way or another, even if it was just saying, God bless you and good night, they started to hear from Tim that Tim was a Christian, and that Tim was proud to be a Christian. Fast forward a couple of years, went to Chicago for some training. And again, I don't even know how it came up, okay, but it did. And I found myself in a room with a bunch of Southern Baptists. And somehow the whole issue of Mary came up. And so I was getting covered with all kinds of questions. And I fielded them as best as I was capable of doing, and didn't back down. I answered the questions. Didn't consider myself an expert, but I answered the questions. As we were walking out of the building that night on our way to dinner, one big old boy, old Bubba, and he goes, you know, Tim, you're not like most Catholics, are you? And I thought, yes. Got it. But I think to a certain extent, that's kind of what we have to start doing. We can't be passive. We have to wear the t-shirt. We have to wear the hat. We have to stand up and be proud to be Catholic. And our friends and our neighbors and our co-workers need to know I'm Catholic. Now, that can be dangerous. You can't say I'm a Catholic and then in the next moment do something kind of mean and nasty. Okay? So that presupposes that you are living a life of example. And that, again, is the challenge, isn't it? Because we all fail at that. We all fall down. But that is a great reminder. If I'm going to say I'm Catholic, then I have to remember, oh yeah, I got to act like one too. Darn, hate that. But that's where it's at. We have to practice. I love our parish mission statement. We are a welcoming Catholic community. But guess what? I think we need to take it even one step further. Are we an inviting Catholic community? Sure, we say hi when everybody walks in the door. But then do we say, okay, you sit over there in that corner while I go over here and talk to my friends? No, you're not going to be joining this group because we're kind of full. We're okay with this group. We don't need your help. If we're going to say we're Catholic, if we're going to invite people or welcome them into our church, then we have to be prepared to invite them into the practice of our faith and the work of our church. And not all of us like to do that, myself included. The third P is persistence. Because guess what? This is not easy, is it? This takes a lot of work. Some of us are ready for it, others probably aren't, and that's okay. We'll all get there. But we need to just keep raising the bar a little bit at a time. The other book that I would highly recommend to you is called Forming Intentional Disciples by Sherry Liddell. And in it she talks about thresholds, levels of thresholds. And it really helps me understand when I'm talking to folks about where they're at so that I can do a better job of welcoming them into the Catholic Church. And it starts with a level of trust. If someone doesn't trust me, they're not going to talk to me. And I'll give you a great example. What's your reaction when the doorbell rings and there's two people with bicycle helmets and black ties standing there? Yeah. No, thank you. Not at home. Sorry. Okay? Why? You don't know them. You don't trust them. You're not going to enter into a conversation. Every year, Christmas and Easter, we put up signs in the local restaurants right around here saying, come to St. Blase. Here's our mass schedule. Join us. And we'll continue to do so that people know about it, but I have no expectation that a total stranger is going to see them and go, hey, I think I'm going to go. Why would they? They don't know anybody here. They probably haven't been in the Catholic Church in so long they have forgotten. Trust is where it starts. And trust starts quietly. It's the relationship you have with your next door neighbor. It's the relationship you have with your coworker. It's the relationship you've got with the guy on the treadmill at the gym next to you. It starts with trust. And after a while, if you really do build up that trust, the next level is curiosity. And boy, this is where we get ourselves in trouble. Somebody walks up to you and says, you know, I got a question about the Catholic Church. And you go, oh my God, why? Come with me to Mass. You're going to love it. And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I just had a question. I'm just curious. When you hear somebody say, I have a question about the Catholic Church, take a deep breath. Okay, maybe even step backwards just a little bit. Okay? Because they're just asking a question. They're curious. So go gentle. Don't scare them. We love to do that. We always say, oh, I got to bring you to Mass and tell Father that I brought somebody with me. You know? Ain't going to happen, folks. They're not ready for that yet. Then they're going to become, over time, they're going to ask you some questions. And after they get over this level of curiosity, they're going to become open. This is where it gets scary. Because now they don't ask you the softball questions. They're tossing hardballs at you. They're tossing the ice-covered snowballs. The tough questions that I may not have the answer for. But that's a sign that they're ready. They're on the cusp. They want to know the tough questions. Explain to me this whole thing about the pre-sex scandal. I want to know more about that. Can you talk about something else? No. Answer the question. And if you don't know the answer, go get some answers. Find out. Because they're ready. They wouldn't be asking the question if they weren't really interested and open to the answer. Then and only then do they get to the level where they decide, you know what, I really do want to become a part of this. I want to know more. And that's where the whole RCIA program comes in, or we welcome them back to the Catholic Church through conversation and through sacrament. But that's a process, isn't it? That takes time. This is not something you're going to go home tonight and go knock on your neighbor's door and go, have I got a deal for you? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. But it can work if you are persistent. The last level is discipleship. And boy, we all work towards that level. We're all going through these levels. We're all working towards this. Some of us are still in the curiosity stage, even though we come to Mass every week. We all seek to become true disciples of Jesus Christ, where we have given ourselves over to the Gospels 100% every day, all the time. What a world this would be if it was a world of disciples. Not there yet. So if we pray, if we practice our faith, if we have some persistence, we might start making some headway. We might start getting someplace. Okay? So what will the church of the future look like? I don't Took a theology class down at the seminary one time, a long time ago. The teacher was Monsignor Zenz. He made a comment that has always stuck with me. Change in the church takes 100 years. 100 years. How long has it been since Second Vatican Council? 50. We're halfway there. What does that mean for most of us? We're not going to see it, are we? You know, and that's a shame. And that's a shame. Because we love our church. We want the best for our church. And unfortunately, God's not going to allow us to see what the outcome is. But what's true is, what the church will be that way because of the work that we do. We are forming tomorrow's church. We are the ones who are making this happen. And it's so hard because our society says, I want it now. Make the change now. And if you ask me, I'll tell you what they should do. Here's do A, B, and C. And by gosh, if you did this, all our problems will be solved. Thank you very much. Meeting's over. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And boy, I wish it did. Because I got my own list. Just like yours. One of the great prophets of our Catholic Church, Dorothy Day, said, the church carries within itself the seeds of its own regeneration. It is the saints who keep appearing all through history who keep things going. I'm looking at a room full of saints. We're going to keep it going. How do I know that? Because you're here. This was an important enough issue for you to show up, to talk about, to think about, and to take it home with you. There was a theologian from the Catholic Church back in 1971 who said this. From the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow will emerge, a church that has lost much. She will become small and will have to start afresh, more or less, from the beginning. In contrast to an earlier age, she will be seen much more as a voluntary society, entered only by free decision. 1971, that was written by Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. He saw it almost 50 years ago. The challenge that we have is to find a way to meet the needs of those people who are not coming to church and to bring them an understanding and an appreciation for the traditions that we have. There's a lot of good people out there doing good things. But I, like yourselves, I believe, really feel that the fullness of God's love and the tradition is found in the Catholic Church. And oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to see a full house. Somebody once said to me not too long ago, boy, these are hard times to be Catholic, isn't it? I said, no, not at all. Not really. I choose not to be discouraged. Do I wish we had full churches? Absolutely. Do I wish Father Randy had 3 associates? Maybe he doesn't, but I do. Okay. These are not hard times to be Catholic. These are challenging times to be a Catholic. Like Pope John said, we must disagree with those prophets of doom. And Pope Francis says, never let us give in to pessimism, that bitterness that the devil offers us every day. Do not give in to pessimism and discouragement. We have the firm certainty that the Holy Spirit gives the church with his mighty breath the courage to persevere and to also seek new methods of evangelization and bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. I think the Catholic Church has a bright future, even if it means with smaller numbers. I see hope every weekend. I see the single dad bring his 3 kids to church every Sunday. I see the young man who, in spite of what his family believes, decided to enter the Catholic Church. I see senior citizens coming to church faithfully, on their knees, praying for their families. I see younger people bringing their parents who are infirm to church, receiving the sacraments. Everywhere I look, I see hope. Everywhere I turn, I see good things. I can go through a long list of what goes on here at St. Blase that also happens at other parishes, Warman Center, the Crest, food baskets, outreach. There's so much good going on. Are you talking about it? Are you sharing it? Are you working it? That's how the Catholic Church is going to grow and survive and thrive. Will it look like it did in 1950 and 1960? No. That ship has sailed. That bus has left the terminal. That doesn't mean that what we have isn't good. That doesn't mean that what we have isn't worthwhile. For 2,000 years, you read the history of the church, time and time and time again. You can go back into the Old Testament for thousands of years before that. Man has tried to screw up the church. He's trying to do stupid things, all in the name of God. And God just rolls God's eyes and says, go ahead, keep working, I'm here. And the church recovers. The church goes on. The church looks different. The church looks the same. It's what we have. It's what our tradition is. And that is not going to go anywhere. Before I take some questions, I'd like to ask you to pray with me. This is from the first chapter of Acts. Jesus is standing there on the shore of Galilee, about to take off. His disciples say, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? He answered them, it is not for you to know the time or the seasons that the Father has established by his own authority. But you will receive the power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. When he had said this, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him from their sight. While they were looking intently at the sky as he was going, suddenly 2 men dressed in white said, Men of Galilee, why are you standing looking at the sky? For the power to witness to Jesus in our world, we pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For courage to live in a manner worthy of the baptismal call we have received, we pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For inner vision, to know hope in God despite the trials and defeat